Hello and welcome everyone in today's webinar regarding security, continuity and recovery. This is Tim Rama from PECB, the PCB organizer, and today we will be talking about continuous improvement and project measurements when implementing an ISO 22301 business continuity management systems. Today with me, the speaker will be Mr. Brian Henry, the president from our partner in South Africa, who will be elaborating this issue in more details. Please, Brian, you may continue.
Thanks very much, Tim, and welcome everybody, and thanks for attending this webinar. Just a quick note about who we are and what we do. We're a small consulting company mainly focused on governance, risk and compliance and business continuity management in particular. We're also a PECB training partner here in Australia and are members of the Business Continuity Institute. We have assisted a lot of companies in implementing business continuity management systems over many years. And all of them, in one way or another, have faced several challenges. So what I'd like to do today is to talk to you a little bit about how we've managed to overcome some of those challenges and try and direct our efforts in the project space and also in the ongoing continuous improvement area. So without further ado, let's get stuck into the idea. First of all, I think you've all seen this statistic somewhere in your travels. About 80% of the projects that enterprises initiate never actually deliver the intended results. There are even worse stats that have been pulled out. And we've been watching this for a while and trying to understand the reasons why. And I think we've latched onto something here which makes a lot of sense. And we've been applying it quite successfully. Large organizations with a program management office, for example, have some 300 to 600 projects on the go at any one time, all initiated with the very best intention, and they may have massive budgets and objectives that will affect the working lives of just about everybody in the organization. They may even have an impact on operating models within the organization. And the champions of these projects face strong resistance to their efforts because of all these factors. Change management becomes a challenge. So if you add to this the complexity of the duration of the project and consider the way the world is working now, it's accelerating more and more. The change that we see every day is becoming more insistent. And any plan that we have to deliver something that spans more than 12 months faces the very real danger of creating a deliverable that's so these large budgets with these large projects, a project for a year to 2 to 3 years, could well end up delivering something which is not worth it anymore. And then you've got the whole issue of the human factor in companies. Failed projects may not be terminated at all. Quite often we've seen this, where the project has failed, but it has continued because it's a source of budget for other projects. So you get this the cross-subsidization of new projects from the budgets from the old projects without anybody realizing that the project should have been shut down. We see that on a regular basis. So the project spectrum and the project portfolios get larger and larger, and nothing ever seems to come out the other end until somebody looks at it and says, hang on a second, this particular project isn't delivering any value. And then the argument is, how do you actually take the money that you've invested and then write it off? Very embarrassing. So what I wanted to do now is to talk a little bit about BCM, Business Continuity Management. As we've been saying over the years, and more specifically, it was just quoted to me again, BCM is a journey, it's not a destination. And yet most organizations out there call in somebody to write their business continuity plan. They write a huge tome of paper, dump it on the desk with an invoice and say, there's your plan, and everybody's happy, and it gets put in the shelf and gathers dust. And we've been saying this for 20 years, and yet it's still the case in so many places. So somehow or other, we've not learned the lesson. So what we have to do is to understand that this is a journey, not just a destination. And it's important to know that we mustn't get lost on the way, and we must know how we're going to reach the end goal. And curiously, no matter what projects that I've looked at out there, so often the end goal has been vague and then lost altogether. So when you do get to the end of the project, nothing looks like the way it should have been in the first place. The classic example of the cartoon with the swing and the specification for a swing seat hanging off a tree, and all the different elements of within the organization trying to redesign this thing till you get nothing like the original. So what you have to do is stay focused on the end state. So we talk about navigating, and let's look at the navigating of, for example, a simple analogy of getting a ship or an airplane from point A to point B. And we talk about coordinates. And what do we mean by coordinates? What we understand by coordinates as a noun, as opposed to a coordinate, which is a verb, in simple terms, it's a set of numbers defining a particular position in two or more dimensions. Now, we can never think in more than three at the moment. Maybe there's a time dimension you can imagine. But you always think about axes at right angles. What we're now talking about here are coordinates in multiple dimensions or multiple coordinates to define the same spot. So we then look at it and say, well, there's another thing called vectors, where you talk about a displacement from a particular point at a particular direction. So you have a distance from where you are to where you want to be, and the direction of that particular point. So there are two ways of looking at this particular challenge. So what does this mean now in terms of business continuity and projects? Well, let's think about planning the journey. Imagine a three-dimensional space, and you're trying to get from the bottom corner up to the big cross at the top, the big red cross. We're considering vectors as depicting a point in space in two measurements, remember. So here you have the current state down at the bottom, where you are now, and your required state, your end goal at the top. And you can achieve this in various ways. You can travel along the axis, the green line called X, and then you can turn left and travel along Y, and then you can go up vertically to Z. So you can imagine that perhaps as three different phases in a project. So you can start with the project and fix one lot of things that need to be fixed, then address yourself to another lot of things that need to be fixed, and then the third one to reach the end goal. But typically a navigator just looks at the line, the red arrow that goes straight up the distance from point A to point B, so to speak, from the current state to the desired state. What we tend to not understand is that we need to quantify the actual axes and directions to get to that coordinate. So there are three vectors here really. There's the X and the Y and the Z vector arriving at your end goal. In travel terms, if you think about traveling from point A to point B, you are sitting at home and you're wanting to get to the sea. So your continuous improvement in that particular journey is the closer you get to the seaside. So your continuous improvement is the distance from the destination. And that's what we're talking about here. So during the project, you should be continuously improving to get to where you want to go. So many projects don't do anything and add no value until the last minute. So if you're not finding a way of improving your situation during your project, then somehow the project is flawed in its concept. That would be my opinion. So how does this translate into an implementation project, you may ask? Well, looking at the same diagram, but in a slightly different way, the current state here that you want to get to and that you are at, the required state of compliance, the red cross, you've got three different factors in this particular project that you want to improve. You want to improve factor X, then you want to improve factor Y, and you want to improve factor Z, which means you've now improved your situation and things have been fixed or altered or made better because of this particular project. Notice there are three, if you like, coordinates, or three vectors, or three metrics, whatever you like to call it, three elements of the state that you're concerned about. So what you're really asking yourself is, how do I know when I've actually achieved the end goal? And in this case, you've defined those three factors and said, when those three factors have the following values, I have achieved my end goal. You'd have to decide on the values for each of those coordinates or factors and determine how far up the line you want to be satisfied that you've improved well enough. So in the real world, it seems that the end goal coordinates are not defined in the outset. And I think that's one of the reasons why projects fail. Because the end goal coordinates are vague. We want to implement a system. And that's kind of where it stops. How do you know that you've implemented the system? When somebody hands it over, when it's actually performing according to the rules that you, and the standards that you want it to. If you haven't defined those rules and those standards, you're not going to achieve the end objective. Very straightforward. So let's look at this particular one and consider a change in intervention. Where your sales are working. So there are 3 different people, because you're worried about the quality of your sales. You want to keep their motivation high. You want to improve their productivity. Those are the 3 things you've decided you need to do. Quite a simple analogy. So let's look at some coordinates that you could use to depict those particular lines there. Recruit good people. You've got an improvement factor or a vector or a coordinate, whatever way you like to say. And you then say to yourself, I would be happy if my sales force, the majority of my sales force have 3 years experience. And the majority I'm talking about is out of 100 salespeople, 85% of them must have 3 years experience. So you've set a stake in the ground. It's not 100%, but that's where you want to be. Currently, if you look at the top of this table here, only 30% of your sales force have got 3 years experience. And you really want 85. So there's your current and your end goal on that particular axis, okay? And you can then set a scale that you're going to measure this on. In this case, we've said the scale will be 0 to 100%. So we've used a percentage scale or percentage units to define the meaning of that particular metric. Then you could say keep their motivation high. Now this works slightly differently. We've got the number of sick leave days that are going on. They're allowed to take 25 days leave. Currently, they're all taking 20 days leave, and you want to bring that down so that they only take 5 days leave. So you now need a scale that takes you down from 20 down to 5 from 20. So you've got a negative scale there, which you would then obviously turn around so that you're moving in a positive direction when looking at it. So the first scale here is percentages. The second one is units. You could have dates. You could have so many different things here to depict the type of thing that you're wanting to measure. And then finally, productivity. What are the measures of productivity? And that can be quite difficult. There are others in business continuity which are very vague and very esoteric, which we can discuss in a moment. But productivity in this case, we're saying 75% of the sales force must achieve their target in the past 2 years. So right now, only 22% of them are achieving target in the past 2 years, and you require 25. So here you have, again, a percentage as a scale, and you have your current state, or the coordinates for your current state as being 30, 20, and 22. So how does that plot on our little diagram? There we have it. You're sitting here with those poor stats. You want to improve your productivity. You want to drop the sick leave, and you want to make sure that you've recruited good people. So that's the project. Now, looking at it as saying, I just want to get from here to here, doesn't tell you really what to do. You have to look at the actions and the project tasks in order to deal with each of these. So now we've got 3, if you like, activities or project phases which we can define. The first one, and this is very simplistic, so please bear with me on this. It's by illustration only. You need 3 groups of activities in this project. You want to recruit good people, you need to keep their motivation high, and you need productivity. So what you can do is you can review the current qualifications, competencies, and capacities. You can retrench people, retrain people, and review people. So those are fairly logical tasks that you would use in order to improve that particular dimension, which is this one here, recruiting good people. The second one, to keep their motivation high. You could review past sick leave forms. You can identify the causes of the illness to determine whether you're not actually sitting in a sick building. Or you could review the seasonal trends. You can prepare corrective campaigns to improve that. Now, that's a bit more difficult than just refusing people their sick leave, which you can't do. But that's the sort of thing that will indicate whether you're getting more productivity out of the people in general. And then the productivity itself is to conduct workshops to identify and understand reasons for wins and losses, okay? And then interview them and revise their targets and target markets and product focus. So those are the sort of things you can do. I have a red one down here, which is upgrading the sales forecast and reporting system, the system you have on your computer. Now, looking at this, going back to what you're wanting to measure, you're trying to measure those three main metrics: recruiting, having good people, motivation, and productivity. You need to ask yourself the question whether or not that last red item, upgrading the sales force and reporting system, is actually worth doing at all. Would it have any impact on any of these other metrics? And when you look at projects in the world today, project plans can be huge, lengthy. All kinds of people have to do specific things by dates. The project managers then beat everybody up who misses a deadline, but nobody ever asks the question whether or not the group of tasks that I've done have actually contributed to the end goal. And I guess we should challenge one another in these projects and determine whether the project plans we've got are not just filled with guff that doesn't take you down the line. So in other words, what we're saying is if you're trying to get from this point here to this point here, and your project plan has something that goes off in another direction, you're going to have to find your way back or waste the time. And that's frequently the sort of thing you find in the projects that we see in the world today. And curiously enough, I don't think I've seen this in the PMBOK at all. So somewhere along the line, that will come in eventually. It's all about deadlines and achieving things on time and on budget, not about achieving the end benefits. So here's a fundamental principle, which I'm sure we've all seen one way or the other. One day Alice came to a fork in the road from Alice in Wonderland. The Cheshire Cat was in the tree. "Which road do I take?" she asked. And his response was another question. "Where do you want to go?" "I don't know," Alice answered. "Then," said the cat, "it doesn't matter which way you go." So the point is, are we actually doing this at the moment in trying to get to the end goals? If we don't see where we're actually going, how do we know whether we've arrived? That really is what this is about. I think it's why so many projects failed. Okay, so let's look at business continuity and bring this back into perspective. Business continuity has traditionally been in the past, until ISO and the evolution over the last 5 to 10 years, been worrying about a worst case scenario where things stop and you have to have plans which you pull out of a hat and then run in order to recover. But this has changed because the ISO standard and the new drive for resilience has said it's no good having that in prepared and never using it. Make the business continuity management system that you have work for you to make yourselves better at whatever it is you do. So resilience considers the effectiveness of the ongoing processes, procedures, and activities of the organization. So no matter how good your business continuity management system is, you need to at least maintain it at a high level, but preferably improve it as you go along, because nothing stays steady. Now, implementers and consultants and auditors, we've had for some time been experimenting with scorecards and dashboards to try and measure this. And everybody has an opinion in the way of doing this, and there are far more learned people who have built extreme dashboards and compliance indicators than I am, but this process worked for us. Our original thinking was directed at the ability to just recover from adverse case scenarios, as I said. That means we need, however, with this ISO, we need to also consider the effectiveness of the ongoing process of procedures. So we need to improve, and that's what continuous improvement is about. But how can you improve if you don't know where you are? Which goes back to the same thing. So if you look at ISO 22301, okay, the BCM frame of reference, ISO 22301 is a very, very good standard. It's the 8th standard that you can be certified in as an organization. And it came out of left field after only 7 having been made that since 1947 or 48. So suddenly we have this demand to put this BCM stuff in place, and it's growing. The reasons are many and varied, but when you do a business continuity assignment, you start to realize the strategy of the organization has to come into focus for your business continuity to be effective. So BCM and strategy come together. So there has to be a way in which business continuity management projects can benefit the organization as a side benefit or as a side effect. But ISO 22301 is generic. It's not prescriptive. It doesn't tell you what you have to do. It just tells you the sort of things that you need to have in place. So there are no specific answers, and they don't say that you must have the indicators in your business continuity plan at 80% or 90% or 100% compliance because of the standard. You have to determine that for yourself. In other words, it depends on your own circumstances, your domain, your market, the way your organization is structured, and so on. But you need to start somewhere, and that's the challenge. So let's look at ISO 22301 and go back to that idea of coordinates. If we look at 22301 just simply and take the 4 chapters, or the chapters 4 to 10, sections 4 to 10, those 10 chapters, like there are 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 7 of them, and you look at the content of those, you should be able to pull out the stuff in there that is relevant to you, that is achievable by your organization, depending on its size and shape. Some people may or may not need an internal audit. It may be outsourced. There may be other reasons for not running the organization the way ISO would suggest, but nevertheless, the intent within those standards and in those clauses should be considered. So you need to extract from each of those tables, each of these sections here, the content that is relevant to yourself. Leadership is one thing if you've got 300 leaders in your organization, but leadership means something totally different if you only have one person leading an organization of 20 people. So things become a little bit vague. You need to decide on that. If you look at these now as the 7 dimensions of business continuity, and if you like, the 7 axes or 7 metrics, you can then plot them on this diagram very simply as a radar diagram to tell you where you are. And here's just an example, an illustration of this sort of thing. It gives you a picture of the state. What this doesn't tell you is how you get to fill this so that the entire block is in the pink. That's the project plan. So now you need to put together a project plan to get you to where you want to be. So when we were doing the PECB 22301 training course, this diagram that's in the training pops up again and again. And it's, if you like, the real roadmap for the entire course. And in it, we found a lot of exciting stuff because this, in essence, if you like, is a framework for implementing a BCMS right through and monitoring and measuring at the end. You could use this as the framework for the plan that you intend to put into your MS project. Those 7 headings that we have would come out of this in a slightly different way, but here's the plan, do, check, act, and the continuous improvement of the right-hand side. A great document indeed. Each of these blocks in here would be a subset of activities or tasks for the project plan that you want to do. Now what we have to do is to align the tasks in here to these, so that the tasks we carry out on this plan are actually driving improvement in these areas here. So aligning the project activities to coordinates now becomes the challenge. Everybody has seen a project plan, which is a Gantt chart with a whole lot of descriptions on the left-hand side to say what that bar on the Gantt chart is meant to be and what you're supposed to be doing to move from point A to point B on that Gantt bar. So for each of those project activities, identify if that project actually affects the coordinates. So look through your project plans, look at each line in the project plan and each task and say, is this thing a relevant task, or is it one of these down here that's going to take us off at a tangent? Then you will stay focused. You'll be surprised at what you find. Ensure that the activities, when they're completed, will result in an acceptable level of compliance. So also, when defining tasks, make sure that the tasks are actually going to deliver some value against the coordinates that we've spoken about here. And then review those coordinates to identify indicators that can be used to track compliance in your own enterprise. So look closely at that and determine how you're going to measure the contribution of that task to the end goal. The assumptions here, the coordinate scales are all 0 to 100% for this example I'm about to show you. And completing all the activities relating to the coordinates results in a coordinate value of 100%. Those are just two assumptions, just by illustration. That may not be the case, depending on how you need to analyze this. So here, let's have a look at a project plan. The effectiveness of the project, if you look along the top here, there are the 7, if you like, indicators. And there are various project plan activities: initiation, understanding the organization, BIAs, risk assessments, etc. And as you do those, so you can track the completeness of each of them. Ask yourselves then, does each of these plans affect one or more of these end goals? Here, for example, initiation affects leadership, understanding the organization, analyzing existing systems, drafting and signing off the scoping documents. All of those affect the context of the organization and also influence the leadership. So if you've got that done, you will start to improve those 2 metrics. Then when you get to the do stage, for example, this is very simplistic. Don't, whatever you do, use this as the guideline. This is just an example. The BIA, RA strategy, etc. will help with the context of the organization and also with the leadership, because the risk assessment, leadership may need to be involved with. Strategy, leadership has to be involved with. So if the leadership now is driving the strategy, your leadership will improve. And so you can connect these activities to one or more of these particular metrics along the top of the spreadsheet. What I'm saying is that if, which is probably incorrect, what I'm saying here for this particular example is if you get 100% here, then you're at 100% compliance on that factor into leadership. But leadership is not only affected by initiation. Let's go down a bit. Leadership is affected in this example by initiation, drafting and signing off the project, the risk assessment and the strategy. And those, just for example, we've said are the tasks which will affect the leadership quality. So you take 1, 2, 3, 4 of those. You take the 100, that 100 there, this 30, and this 0, and you put the average up there. So your leadership is improved to 58%, or improved by 58% because of that particular thing. So now you can start to see the effects that these tasks will have on those metrics. So let's look at the check act cycle. Now this is the plan and the do cycle. Okay. So in the check act cycles, having established the BCMS within the scope agreed by going through this, and you have an overall score here, which is acceptable. By running these through, you've now reached an 85% improvement based on your particular scale of measure. Let's look at the check act cycles. Okay. Some of these items on the left are deliverables from an implementation project. BCMS management procedures, policy, business impact assessments, and so on. Okay. These will all need to be defined and maintained to ensure that the original deliverables are improved wherever possible. So exercises and tests. So some items on the left are deliverables from the implementation, and then there are things like review dates, etc. So you can use things to measure whether or not these testing schedules and exercise tests and audit programs have been signed off from the correct at the correct time. And you can put a yes or no answer to that automatically. wherever possible, don't do questionnaires where you ask people if they've done this or not done it, because they'll always say yes. If you can have proof or evidence that they actually have done it by a date on a document, then you've actually achieved a reasonable measure of where they actually are. So measure compliance as a percentage wherever relevant and wherever possible, because it seems to be easier. So you set the review date, for example, anything older than 12 months is non-compliant, or any other way of giving a value to the quality or the effectiveness of these particular things. And this is just an example of something that are going on there. But these are activities as well, management reviews. You can now, having put your project together and implemented your BCMS, go into the do and the act cycles, or the check and the act cycles, to check that these things are there. So having delivered them in the project, you know they are there, but they will then decay. You have to deal with that in a different way. So here are examples of some of those. The currency of the formalized procedures, the BCMS management procedures, for example, the policy, is it less than 12 months old? Is the BCMS scope less than 12 months old? Or any of these? Then you can ask, have the testing schedules been checked every January? So these are different ways of putting a metric against these deliverables. You can start to measure whether they're there or not. Awareness programs and cultural alignment. I hinted at this earlier a lot. How do you improve the embedding of your business continuity plan in the minds and culture of your organization? Various ways you can do it, but you can't just get everybody to log onto an intranet, sign that they're logged on and log off and say they know what they're doing, which has been the only way to make things happen in a 30,000 people organization when you suddenly need to be compliant with the new act. For example, a money laundering act, etc., everybody has to be compliant in all the banking sector by the 1st of July. So suddenly your 30,000 people have to log on and log off, and that's the evidence that they all comply, not the fact that they understand the domain that is being questioned. So this whole issue of understanding and awareness, etc., needs to be built in a slightly different way. One can be obviously a percentage of attendance at the awareness sessions and the signing that they've understood the awareness session at the end of the page, or some intranet test, intranet learning page which describes it to them and puts them through a small exam that they then pass, and so it goes on. So this metric challenge here is quite an interesting one, but you can simplify these down to about 3 or 4 ways of measuring these kinds of things. So now, having done this, here we have the BCMS management procedures, etc. Let's look at this again and look again at the compliance and maturity measures of these. Here are your sections 4, 5, 6, and 8. And you set up your scorecard in some way like this, so that you can determine what you're going to measure. What you're starting to do is get your vectors and your coordinates along here. A whole lot of things that have to be checked, so if you can put some values to this to make sure that that coordinate doesn't slide below where you should be and you get off station, or you get dislodged from your end state for whatever reason. So as the organization evolves and changes in response to all these strategic drivers, the revision of the scoping document should reveal non-conformities of the action of the BCMS framework. What we're talking about here is the original scoping document, for example, was where you said you were going to put your business continuity management system into the central offices of your organization, but not in the coastal region, and you've run the project to deliver that particular end state. The next stage is now to roll that out to the coastal regions as well. So the scope will have changed, and by changing the scope for that very reason, your context of your organization and your leadership here then will be affected, because you now have to take that scope and get it signed off by the people in the regions as well. So the extent of these things and the intensity with which these things need to be managed becomes stronger as your BCMS matures. So now the scorecard here, okay, here's an example. You have a compliance and maturity measure, okay, here on the left. You can have an example metric here, the currency, etc. And then you can ask the questions in your scorecard. For example, the business impact assessments, are they less than 12 months old? No. So your score on that is 0. Whereas the policy, you only recently updated, so it's 100%. So you look at these and you say, of these particular metrics, which of them affect our dimensions, our coordinates for our overall view? And you can do the same thing as you did with the projects. So that's now getting to the do and the check act of the particular metric. Okay, so finally we've got to the point now where we're building the scorecard. We've built a scorecard which is telling us what we're measuring. We're telling us what we have to change or to do, what project tasks we need to execute in order to improve those metrics or those coordinates. Now you have to report back on them. And how do you report? Well, you have to summarize this thing somehow. You have to keep it short. And the reason you have to keep it short, really, is because the people that are going to read it don't have time to read. Usually in expos and so on. There are all the traditional reporting graphs that you can throw into this. And after all the calculations have been done in your scorecard, etc., don't deliver the scorecard in total, just deliver the conclusions from the scorecard. So make it understandable, highlight the key aspects, and remember that in an all-day exco, BCM is only one agenda item out of many. And you may sit there for 3 hours after your allotted time waiting to present that particular part or get to that part of the agenda. They seldom read even more than 2 pages beforehand, with great respect. Okay, use graphics that are clear and compare it with the last report if you possibly can, because we're now talking about the continuous improvement part. And just to show you some examples, here is an example of some report content. Here's your BCM scorecard with those 7 dimensions which you've chosen to measure yourself against. There is the score, overall score, 100%. The context is fully defined. Your leadership is 66%. Your planning isn't too bad, isn't too good, but the support you've established is fine. The operation of this BCMS is not fully matured. You've got a very good performance evaluation capability in here, and your improvement capability is all right as well. So then you could put in a little legend, for example, to say, this is what these things mean. And you can also show it, as we did in that spider diagram. But those are the 7 dimensions which we've spoken. So now we have taken the 3 dimensions to 7 and flattened it out into the spider diagram or this radar diagram as well. It all depends on how you look at it. Then finally, you can actually put in a maturity curve. And these are great because if you can get this dot moving up from one exco to another or from one reporting meeting to another, people can see the value. And that's about the only thing you need to show. Because if it starts to drift down, they'll start asking questions. And then you need to set a goal up here to say that's where we want to stay. And then measure where you are on an ongoing basis. And if, as I said, you fall off station, so to speak, you're in a holding pattern at 85%, and suddenly, because you've included the coastal regions, you've now dropped to 55%, the dot should fall down here because of the way you're measuring those things. So that's one way of doing it. And then finally, just to look at a summary report. And this is a good way to do it because people tend to have different views within the organization of their role and their responsibilities as far as their BCM is concerned. Despite all the awareness, and despite all the training, there will be people, new people and older people who've been around a long time, who think this continuity stuff is just a load of mumbo jumbo, and it isn't necessary. They've never needed it in the past. Why do they need it now? So those are the sort of things you have to work on. The way to deal with that is to put some competitive stress into the organization and then take different departments, for example, and give them each their own scorecard or dashboard so that you can see the progress of the different parts of the organization. And then in the exco, when the heads of all these departments are sitting in front of the board and the MD, they then have to answer why these things are red or explain the parts where it's red. And at the end of it all, you have on the left-hand side here, and on the right for that matter, the overall scores of all of these collectively for the corporation. And that one page is the kind of thing you should be aiming at in order to produce a scorecard which is meaningful to the exco's of this world and to your organization at large. So finally, and in summary, as I said, BCM is a journey, not a destination. Clearly define where you need to get to and by when. Define clearly how you will know when you arrive, so set the coordinates. Draw up the route map in the form of a project plan. Make sure that you avoid deviations or irrelevant tasks, things that don't add value. Then run the project. Then you'll know that you've arrived. And then define a set of new improved coordinates and repeat the process. So go back and create a new project to now improve the ones that you want to and start all over again at the top. So there we are. Thank you very much for attending. I hope it's been of some interest to you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Brian, for this presentation. Actually, we have one question from Vaslav Stverka. His question is, what tool do you use to evaluate the effectiveness of the project Excel or some other SW tools?
Thanks, that's a good question. We've been working on this thing for 6 or 7 years with Excel. It's not an ideal platform, but it's a good place to start. And it's also a good place to get yourself muddled up. So you need some expertise in Excel. It would be far better to do something like this in SQL or one of the packages that you can, on a development package that you can have. I've not seen anything like this in any of the software that we've looked at, but then I haven't been looking too hard. Maybe some of the new stuff is beginning to develop dashboards like this. But I've also not seen anyone who's actually used this thinking in any of their project management either. So maybe we're onto something where there's a PhD in the offing for somebody out there.
Okay, and if we have any other questions, please write them at the right-hand control panel and we will answer them. This is the question and answer session, so it will be our pleasure to answer your questions.
What's the question? Yeah, which I noticed. Is that, yes. Indeed. Thank you very much for that question about it being too complex. I tend to agree with you because it's taken us a long time to think our way through this. And to now hit everybody with it inside your organization is going to take a while. But if you can simplify the way you do it, then that would be magic. So thanks very much indeed there. I definitely would like to stay in touch.
Okay, in that case, thank you very much, Brian, for this presentation, and I want to thank all the attendees as well for sparing their time of their busy schedules. We will be organizing the webinars for next week as well, so please keep in touch and stay up to date with our webinar schedule in our website. If you have any questions that comes out in your mind later, you can write at north.america@pecb.com. It will be our pleasure to answer to them. Thank you once again, Brian, and speak to you soon. Bye.
Thank you very much, Tim. Take care. Bye-bye.